Yep. Good evening, everyone. So, yesterday we learned about how to deal with component properties. So, we learned about two basic things, components and the component related properties, how to handle. We created reusable components. We learned how to create reusable components and customizable. We can reuse and we can customize. So, after understanding these component related basic things, now till now you learnt about React components. The summary I will give, we learnt about React components. And in this, I explained everything about functional components. Functional, and you can say function components. In that, we learned various techniques like data binding, event binding, class and style binding like techniques. And we discussed about how do we use component properties. This is what we learned. Another important, today we will just see what is the concept of conditional rendering. Conditional rendering. It's a simple concept, but it is regularly used. Conditional rendering is nothing but allowing to render different type of content according to the situation. That means a component will not have the same presentation every time. It will change according to situation. That means a component template can change according to state and situation. That's what actually component. For example, we are writing one function. Function is defined. This function is configured with some written value. Is defined with some written value. Can you define a function with more than one written? Now, so if can you write another written? No. Then how you can make it written multiple? Different. We can use condition. So if the condition is matching, then it will return value 1. If the condition is not matching, then it will return another value. It will return value 2. This is actually conditional rendering. That is the concept of conditional rendering. So if condition is matching, it will return specific. If condition is not matching, it will return something else. That is what actually the concept of conditional rendering. Now the point is how this is possible here. For example, how we can handle that. How it is possible here. Means how do we design? For example, let's say I will create one component. This is an empty div. And this is an empty div. Okay. Now we will add one component. So I will create a simple rough component here. A new folder. I'll say template demo. Okay, I'm adding a new file, template demo.component.js. So we are writing a function here. We are writing a function, export function. So template demo component, and it is having, so here it is having some properties. Now means it is parameterized, it is configured with some properties. Now we are using the properties here. If props.layout, I'm adding some layout. If props.layout is, I'm just giving the layout is equal to some layout name. Suppose layout name I will give as vertical. So, or I give the layout name as horizontal. If the layout name is horizontal, then it will return some presentation. It will return some presentation. I will put a span, we will put home, I will put a span, we will put about, I'll put a span like contact, like this. Now I'm using here another else. What it will return? Else it is going to return another presentation. Here we will keep a div. This is home, and we have another div. So it is about, and we have another div. This is contact. That means we are configuring in this way. Now you created a component whose presentation depends on different layouts. That means now what we have to do is, let's go to the properties here. I will put a heading conditional rendering. We are adding some conditional rendering here. And we want to access the template demo component. We are using template demo component. So we are importing the template demo component here. Now this template demo component have a property called layout. Layout I defined as what? Horizontal. Layout is horizontal. Layout is horizontal, it will keep side by side. That means it will keep side by side. I am giving here layout is vertical. Vertical, it will keep one below another. That is conditional rendering. That means we are completely changing what it is going to present, what it is going to render. It can render different content also, not different layout. It can render different content. If it is matching with the situation, suppose if it is vertical, it is having some div like blog, right? So it is vertical, it is having blog. And suppose I defined here as horizontal, not vertical, it is horizontal. If it is horizontal, then it will display only home, about, contact. We can change appearance. We can change content, what content to display. So this is conditional rendering. So how we can change the contents? Actually, you might have learned media queries. When you learned about CSS media queries, you know, horizontal orientation, portrait orientation. In horizontal, it will display in another way, min width, max width. When you set to mobile, it will change its layout. When you rotate landscape, it will change. So this is not media query. This is conditional rendering. That means it is rendering the content and changing the content according to situation. If your situation is matching, then it will render that content, otherwise another. Now, can we control this by using any content dynamically? For example, here I am adding a simple div. Okay, class name as margin bottom is 2. Here I am using a drop down. So I am using a select. In the select, I am giving an option as horizontal, and I am giving an option as vertical. Now this is having a value as horizontal. Value is horizontal. And it is having a value as vertical. Vertical. These are the values. Now what should happen is when user selects vertical, it should display vertical. And when user selects horizontal, it should show horizontal. That means the component should change its behavior dynamically. It should change the behavior dynamically. Then see, we are declaring here constant. So here we will define as orientation. Orientation, set orientation. And it is use state. And use state, yeah, this is the orientation. Default orientation here I will use. So an option here I will keep an option. So this is select layout. Layout. I'm just giving select layout. And value is I just given as -1. -1 means it is not any option, right? Okay, now here we are defining function. The function is layout change. Layout change. This will fire up when user changes on change, layout change. And on layout change, we will get, so here, simple condition here, if e dot target dot value is equal to what? Horizontal. If it is horizontal, then set orientation as horizontal. Or we can simply put e dot target dot value. So else what should happen? E dot target dot value, set orientation, we will put as vertical. Vertical. That is how we define. Now this orientation I am applying to this layout. So the layout is getting the value from orientation. It is dynamically passed. The layout is getting the value from orientation. So you select orientation horizontal and vertical, it will change. We can dynamically control. A component's behavior you can control dynamically. That is what we can do. Complete appearance we can change. Why? Because already we know you can apply a lot of classes, styles, effects. For example, this is a navigation bar like. That means you are creating a navigation bar like. So this is in the div you mentioned. Actually, these are all inside a nav area. These are all inside nav area. So these are all inside nav area. This is also all the divs inside nav area, means navigation. Now we can apply some effects for them. You can use CSS, you can dynamically apply CSS. That means, for example, every span will have a class name. Class name I will give margin and 4. That means every span is margin and 4. So this is margin. This is having the class name as margin bottom 3. So this is margin bottom 3. And we want an appearance like a buttons or all, you can apply that. This is vertical and this is horizontal. So technically we are going to change the appearance of the contents. Now I hope you can try grid layout. Suppose if they selected catalog, it should show in a card style. And if they select a table, it will show in a table style. Like this, you will see real world components, so many. Right? They will ask what styles you want for this grid, how you want to display the data. You change. So that means conditional rendering allows you to change the content, change the behavior, change the layout dynamically. Depending on situation, it will do. Here, not just content layout is changing, its content also can change. Content also can change. For example, suppose here I am defining like this. Suppose here I am writing, this is Facebook, and this is like Twitter, and this is like Instagram. And here I am not using the words like this. I am not using the words like this. I am just using the class BI and Facebook. BI, so BI Facebook. And we are using BI Twitter. And we are using BI Instagram. And here we are using some BI and BI some LinkedIn. Now you can see here, this is the horizontal or vertical layouts. This is vertical. When I change this to horizontal, it will be like this. That means you are changing the layout and complete content is changing. That means horizontally, vertically. What functionality they have to do also you can change, because already conditional rendering is happening. So this is the concept of conditional render. That means we can design the components which can change dynamically, right? So I hope based on this you can try. So I will give here an example. This is an example for in that first. So here we can use this one. This is a template demo. Template demo.component.js, yeah. And here if we are defining this one, another one is properties.component.js. In properties component, we are adding this. This is a simple example. Here we are defining the orientation. So conditionally, we can render different contents. For example, now let's try that same here also. That means let's go into the grid component here. We designed a grid component here. Now this grid component is rendering in a tabular form. That means we can change the layout in a table form or in a card form, how you want to display. the contents, how you want to display. Then I hope you can try that now. Okay. No need to give that as example. You can try that. You have to try. So what you do, you put layout property. If layout is table, then it should display in tabular form. If layout is a catalog, then it should display in cards. It should display in cards. You try. Right? That means what you have to do, just change this from table to what? Cards. You have to write two conditions. Na? If properties layout is table, this one, else it is card. You can have multiple else if you can use switch cases. If there are many conditions, you can use switch. Switch also conditionally renders. We can use the switch cases. You try that, right? You got an idea how to handle, then you based on that, you can try. This is very common concept, how conditionally you can render different types of contents, right? This is all component related, some important topics you need to know. But all these topics are related to function components. Now we will see how to handle class components. How to handle class components. All these days we worked with function components. I told you that a component can be designed by using a class or by using a function. Just you need to understand difference. What is the difference between class and function? Because earlier lot of changes were there, but now we are not worried about classes because functions will provide all facilities what class have. That's the reason in the latest versions of React we are not very much concerned about class. And we are not much using also. But in many React projects, your components may be using classes. But in the modern generation, we prefer using functions. We have some differences between them. I will tell you what are the differences. Actually, to use class components, you have to know some new concepts. You need to know some new concepts. Already first thing, to use class components, you should know what is JavaScript class. What is JavaScript class? You should know what is JavaScript class. You should know class members. You should know about class inheritance. You should know about class polymorphism. Because you are using JavaScript class. Remember, later we can use TypeScript class. TypeScript class have more features than JavaScript class. Because JavaScript class will not support all OOP features. But TypeScript supports all OOP features. That means, for example, in JavaScript, you cannot have access modifiers like public, private, protected. In TypeScript, you can have access modifiers, right? So in JavaScript, you cannot have static keyword. In JavaScript, you cannot have that. In TypeScript, you can have. In JavaScript, no interfaces and abstract classes. We don't have an interface. We don't have abstract class in JavaScript object-oriented. But in TypeScript, we have. So when you are doing React with the TypeScript, then lot of new things are there related to class. JavaScript classes, you should know what is the class, what are the class members, which already we discussed. So class members are properties, methods, accessors, and constructor. These are the members of a class. Can we write a function in class? Can we have a function as class member? No. But a function can be in class, but not as class member. Can we have variable in class? Yes, but variable cannot be a class member. So then how to store data in class, how to handle, we will see that. So let's see how we can use class components in React. So here JavaScript classes, that means here I will tell you a simple point. You can use JavaScript class for designing a component. You can use a JavaScript class for designing a component. Then how we can work with that? Let's see. So what are the rules, how to design and all, right? That means syntactically, how we create export, because class also should export class name. But this is a general JavaScript class. How React knows that it is component? It is a general JavaScript class. How React knows that it is a component? So every component class gets the behavior of component by inheriting, by extending React dot component base class. So every component class gets the behavior of a component once it inherits that React component base class. It extends the React component base class. That means what we have to do syntactically, export class name, it extends React dot component class. Then only it is treated as a component. Then only it is referred as a component. So otherwise it is not component, it is an ordinary class. So an ordinary class cannot be used as component. So you have to make it and mark it as component. And when you are extending any class, then you need to be very careful. Because already we know extensibility issues. I told you inheritance rule. What is inheritance rule? The derived class constructor must call base class constructor if base class is having a constructor. That is important rule you have to follow. That means now see here, let's see how to create a class. Now I am designing a new component. Okay, and here I will add a new folder in components. So class demo, right? And we will add a new file. This is, I think already we have login. Okay, I will create this as register. Okay, just register. I will add a new file, register.component.js. This is register component.js. Now we need to design a component by using JavaScript class technique. That means we have to use export class. Class name is what? Register component. This is the class. But this is not having component behavior yet. To give a component behavior, that means you have to extend, it extends React dot component base class. That means it should extend that React component base class. This is the component base class. You can see that is the class. And if you want to know what is this component class having, means base class is having, because remember, entire React library is built in TypeScript. You will be little confused because the library is not in JavaScript. It is completely built in TypeScript. So a lot of new things you will see, which you will understand once you learn TypeScript also. We will discuss TypeScript. I will give you a basic introduction of what is difference between JavaScript and TypeScript. We will learn how to build the same React app using TypeScript, right? But as of now, you right click and go to definition. And it will take you to the definition. You see, it says component is an interface. This interface is extending the class. It is extending the class component. Actually, you see, this is extending component life cycle. What is that component life cycle? We are going to learn now. We are going to see that. Now go to the definition of component life cycle. This is component life cycle. And see, component life cycle is having some phases. Component did mount. Component did mount. So should update, component will mount, component did catch, like this. These you will learn now. We will understand this. Actually, first we will learn how to create a simple component. Right? How do we define a simple component? For example, this is a class component. Okay, ready. As per the rules of a component must render some markup. Function component is rendering by using return. Am I right? The markup is returned by using return. Function have return. That return is returning markup. Can a class have return? So can a class have return? No. Then how it will return a markup? A class cannot have return. Then how it returns a markup? Generally, class components use a render method. This render method you haven't created, then how it is working? Because it is borrowing that from React component base class. React component base class have a method called render. This render method is going to render. It is going to render. For example, it is going to render a div. So I am writing a div. I am writing a div. You see, it's not working. Because remember, actually render is a function, method. Render is a method, class method. This method will not directly return anything. Because you learned, I told you, if you remembered, what is difference between method and function? What is difference between method and function? What is the difference between method and function? Technically, method is void type. Methods are void type. Functions will have return. Methods will not have return. Functions will have return. That means you see here, this render is using, that means here I am using return. That means I am returning some content. This function, this render is not rendering anything. You observe carefully, is that base having that render or not? Go to definition. And it is coming from which class? Component. In the component, you can see there will be some methods. Here you will find lot of methods. Huh? This is constructor. Na? It is having a constructor. And observe carefully, this is having lot of methods which are void type. Actually, void, it is having state, it is having reference, and it is having lot of options here. It is displaying lot of options. Remember, you will able to understand these once you know about TypeScript. Huh? But basically here, suppose I am finding render method. That means the render method, you can see render. It is a member of component specification. This is render is a type called React node. React node. What is meant by node? We discussed virtual DOM process, na? Remembered virtual DOM process? Tokens are converted into elements. Elements are arranged in a hierarchy as parent and child nodes. Am I right? That means this React node is going to generate a DOM. That means the render is of type node. And see here, the node can return string number, or it can return any element. It can return any element. So React is a method which can return any element. It can return any element or it can return any string. That means it is a method which is having a return type. Generally methods are what type? Void. But this is a method which is returning some type. That is the reason this is inbuilt inbuilt library. We are just trying to understand, because at extreme experience level, they can go this much in depth and ask you a question. That means if you say I am 10 years experience, what should I ask to a 10 years experience person? Already he is good, he is genius, he is working from 10 years. Then what should I ask him as question in interview? Without interview, I cannot take him. That means when you are a project lead, we have to undergo an interview. That means we have questions for project leads also. Right? Technology is so complex that you have questions for anybody. From 20 years, he is working on technology. Still, we can ask him some questions which he may not know. 20 years he may work on same technology, but we have still questions which he can't answer. That much complex it will be. If anybody says that, so how a component renders element, how a class component renders element. So it's a technical concept. Class components renders element by using render method. Render method is what type? A node type. React node means it's a virtual DOM type, which will create element and add element into virtual DOM. This method is returning. That means you see now here, I am writing, what is it? Render method. Render method. This is rendered method. So this is rendered method. Method is written, it is void type, it is showing. But actually what this render method can return, I am writing like div. I am keeping some heading. This is which component? Register component. Register component. Is it defined with any return? It is not defined with any return. Then it is void type na. If it is not defined with any return, it is void type. Now let's see. I will go to index. I will import that component. What is that? Register component, and it is a class component. And I will run this here. So you can see I am trying to run, it is showing error. You see, it says method should have a return statement because method is default what type? Void. Default void type. That means now what we have to do is this render method have to return. It should return a markup. It should return a markup. That means you define in this way, it will display. This is how a class component can return. Class component cannot have directly written because class don't return anything, right? Class is a logical entity. Functions can directly return. Then how class component can return any markup? A class component can return any markup by using which method? Render. By default, render is void type. By default, render is void type. If you want render to return any element and add into virtual DOM, then you have to do that by using which keyword? By using return. That means this return have to return some markup to it. This is the way how you configure. That means this is okay. First line. Another important class component, const component returns. So returns a presentation, returns a fragment. Actually, we call as fragment. Returns a fragment by using render method. Render method. And important, render method is of type, what type? React.node is of type React node. So what it is going to do is React node creates and adds element into virtual DOM. React node is going to create and add element into virtual DOM, right? That means finally how it have to do. That means you should say here render method must have return statement. Render method must have return statement. Through return statement only it can return elements. It can return any element. So syntactically now it is complete process like this. How do we do export class? So here a name, this extends React dot which component? React dot DOM, React dot component, and here it should use render method. This render method have to return. It should return the markup. This is how we need to define. So actually we call this as React dot what? Fragment. That I will explain separately. React dot fragment. That's what we need to handle. So this is how we need to create a class component, how we design a class component. So to create a class component, this is the basic hierarchy. This is the basic concept. All other features will work similar, but some more things you need to know. I will put class name, some container fluid, and here this is just an option heading like register user something, And you can see it is displaying that content. And here we want some data binding and all, property binding, event binding, all these, how it will work, we will see now. Now the concept is here, how data binding works in a class component. Let's see the difference one by one. Component is there, how data binding works. That means in general function component, you can store data in a variable and you can bind. But it is not recommended because variables are immutable. Variables are immutable. That is why where we stored the data in a state, and through that we are accessing. In a class where we can store data, in a class, data can be stored in a property. Suppose I am creating title as a property. This title is having some user register. Now you can see this heading is empty currently. This user register is a property. You can see empty. I want to display that here. Then I am using a binding expression. I am accessing that title here. But remember, this is class. In a class, how you can access members of class inside class? By using the keyword this dot what title, that is user register. That is how we have to deal with the class. For every member that you use in class, you have to use this keyword. That means, so first thing here, we will see the first point you need to understand here. So data binding in class. Data binding in class component. You designed a component, data binding in class component. First thing, class can store data in property. So you can access the property within class by using this keyword. We have to do that by using this keyword. So this is simple concept, how the data binding works. That means I will copy this one, and this is the example. This is just a simple example for that, means how we can create. It's a simple same file. What is it? Register dot component dot JS. JavaScript module only. But we used a class component here. But this is not recommended. Don't use any properties. It's not recommended to use properties because these properties will not allow to change. Then here also we need to use what? State. In every component, if you want the values to update, then you have to use state. Now the question is how you store data in a state and how you will bind the data here. How you can store data in a state and bind. That means how state works here. So that means now here, so here one question is actually, now what is the problem in property here again? That means component properties. Remember, component class property. Properties are, component properties means different concept. Component class properties are immutable. Actually, JavaScript properties are mutable. Variables are immutable. But if it is a class component, its properties are immutable. then what you have to do is you have to handle data by using state. Now, in many here questions in interview, the question asked is, can we use state hook, use state hook in class component, in class component? So the answer for this, no. Hooks are only for function. They will never work in class, because in class functions cannot be there. Na? In class we can't have functions, and every hook is a function. Use effect or use state, these are functions, they don't work here. That means, so if anybody asks why they don't work here, so that means why use state cannot be used in class component. Class component, because why? Because use state is a function. Use state is a function. Class cannot have function as class member. Am I right? It's not possible. That means this use state is only for function components. Then how we handle state here? Then how to handle state? So another point is how to handle state in class component. In class component, how to handle the state? It's very simple actually. React dot component base class defines implicit state. That means it already have state inside. That means it defines implicit state. Internally state is present. It is having implicit state. So you don't need any use state like function. That means remember, every class component in React is defined with built-in state. That is the reason, hence components are also called as stateful components. They are also called as stateful components. Actually, one of the main difference few years back React people give between function and class is they say that React function cannot have states because there was no use state at all. Use state not there earlier versions. In earlier versions before React 15-16, we don't have use state. These hooks in React introduced newly from React 17 and higher versions. That means we don't have use state, we cannot use state in function. That is the reason in order to use state, people have to depend on lot of classes. But now we don't need, because even a function can maintain a state. But how a function can maintain state? Internally, will it have a state? No. Explicitly by using state hooks. Those hooks are functions. You cannot use them in classes. Then how we can maintain here? You can see here. See, let's go. I will go to component based definition. Go to definition. I am going to the definition. This is definition. In this definition, you can see this is the component class. And you see there is an S here. S parameter is there. There is one parameter called S. Actually, this P is a property and this is a state. Component have properties and state inbuilt. For example, I will search here Control F state. You can see there is a state here. You can see there is a state. You can see there is a state. This is set state, and you can see there is a state. That means every class is having a state. It is having a state. Inbuilt, it is having a state. Then how do we use that? How do we use that? How do we configure and use the state? Actually, generally, see now, this is important. Generally, what happens is you are importing this, implementing, extending that component, React component. Now, what happened? This class is created and it is adapting all the features of that component base class. It is adapting all of them. And it allows you to extend, it allows to extend. But remember, the state is created. The state is created at the time of creating component. The state is created at the time of creating component. Remember, this component need to be created by your React whenever the component is called. That means you are calling the component here. Then first what it will do, it will create the component, and after creating component, it will start using the component. Every component that you imported in index, first it will create that component, loads its component data. Actually, it creates a component object. That component object contains all the information about component. That means the state is created. The state is created for every component at the time of creating component. Now tell me, what is component creation phase? Class object creation phase. What is the class object creation phase? Class object creation phase, that is constructor. What is constructor's purpose? To create an object for class. To create an object for class. So if you want to use state, then you have to first configure state. Currently, component is created. It is working, but state is not configured. If you want to configure state for this component, then you have to do that in the constructor. In the constructor. Here, now one technical problem will come. What is the technical problem? Base class is having a constructor. If base class is having a constructor, as per the rules, derived class constructor must call base class constructor. Na? That means we have to call by using which keyword? Super. And see that base class constructor is expecting properties. Base class constructor is expecting properties. Component can have properties. Those properties I will give here. Means I will just give props. Later we will learn about properties. It is compulsory. It is mandatory that you have to call the base class constructor in derived class. Already I told you. I explained you OOP concepts of JavaScript. There, this rule we learned, that it is mandatory that the derived class constructor must call the superclass constructor. And now at the time of constructing component, you can configure state. At the time of configuring, you can configure the state. How to configure the state? We can use this dot state. We can use this dot state. You don't need any use state hook because state is inbuilt there. Inbuilt there, then you can access that state. So you haven't configured, then how it is coming from the base class. And remember, this state is an object type. In this object, you can have properties. For example, title is a property. What should be the title? I will give the title as user login. User login is the title. Now, how to access this state object and use here? So we need a binding expression. I will give this as suppose user register something. And here we need to access the state. How to access the state? This dot what? State, and state have a property called title. And the title is going to display here. And you can see the properties are not defined. Currently, we are not using properties now. Leave it empty because later we can use the properties. Now it is fine. Properties are required when we are passing the properties. We are not passing any properties as of now. That means this is how we configure state. You don't need use state. You can't use use state here. Use state is a hook only for functions. So earlier we don't have that. From React 17 and higher, these hooks came. Remember, don't get confused. Lifecycle hooks are different. React hooks are different. Lifecycle hooks will be in class. React hooks will be in functions. Don't get confused. I will give a detailed clarity on that in the next concept. In the next concept, we will discuss that. Right? So hooks, there is no concept of hooks in React classes. Hooks is only for functions. So class have life cycle hooks. Life cycles hooks are different. Hooks are different. Class have life cycle hooks. We call them life cycle methods. But here state is defined in this way. How do we configure the state? How we define the state? That is defining the state and storing some data. You can store any data. That means I am defining product. Again, product is object type. So this product have a name. So TV. This product have price, some price. This product have some stock. So true or false. This is the data in a state. Your use state is different and this is different. Now here, how to display the product details. So data list, data term. So suppose here just I am using as product details. Okay, and here I am using data term name and data definition. We need to access this dot state dot product dot name. That's how we access. Another is price. So we need to define. So this dot state dot product dot price. And we have another term stock. And here we have, so this dot state dot and the product dot stock is equal to true, then put available. Otherwise you put out of stock like this. And you can see that is the data it is going to display. That is how we configure the state. It can be array, it can be anything here. Now, for example, here I am defining another categories. Categories is an array. We have like electronics, we have like footwear like this. Now we want all these categories to display in a drop down. That means we will put here some select category. And here we are using a select drop down. Now, how do we do that? That means here we need to put an expression. This dot what, state dot what, categories dot what map. We are reading every category and we are printing an option for every category. So here we will print the category and here we will put a key. So, and the key is category. That means we are creating a drop down with all this. This is how we manage the data. But here there is no need of any use state. Everything is configured by using the state. Remember, state cannot be defined outside constructor. That means the state is configured in the constructor only. Because the state is initialized at the time of creating component, and creating component is actually constructor. Because component have other phases also, loading component. In loading component, if you try to create state, it will show error. It says that state must be before loading component. That means it must be configured in the constructor. That means state must be configured in a constructor of class, component class. And very important, state is object type. It is object type. So you cannot have a string inside. That means it's an object type. In that object, you can have string, number, boolean, object, array, anything. State cannot directly deal strings. State cannot directly deal any number. It have to use everything like an object. And very important, that means you need to syntactically define like this. In the constructor, we need to define super constructor first. After that, this dot state is an object. So in this, you can define the key and the value. And value can be any type. Can be any type. You can define in this way. This is how we configure. And how do we access that anywhere? So we have to access by using this dot state dot key. That's how we need to access anything. Now, if you want to store any data into state. If you want to store any data into state, then you have to define by using the method ready-made set state. There is a ready-made method called set state. By using this set state method, you can set any value into state. But when to use this set state method, that you have to decide depending on your logic. Right here, lot of complications, means not complications, completely different scenarios will be there. For example, see now, this is first example. Up to this, I will give example without set state. First, this is example register.component.js. In this, let me keep this data. That means this is how we are configuring. Okay. Now here, how do we set state actually? That means methods and all we will see. Generally, you cannot use directly the method. You cannot directly use the method called set state. You cannot use directly the method set state. Actually, we have a method set state. So this set state method will set values into this one. It is what type? It is object type. Na? In that object type, suppose we have title. What should be the title? Title is that, like suppose title is a string type. That means you can define this is another object. So here we define title and we say So user details. So something like this. But you cannot directly use set state. You cannot directly use set state. Why? Because to use set state, you need certain events to handle. That means when to set state. So when to set state, we need some event like on load or on click, on change, on blur. You need to write some functions. So I will show you that. But technically, what is the method used for storing data into state? We have to use set state. You need to define set state here. So this is actually data binding. Set state example we will see. How to use that, we will see that. Now here, how you configure. This is actually data binding in which component class. So accessing the data and binding the data and displaying the data, right? Now here, what is the key concept is how the class and style binding works. Style binding works. So it is same as function component. So no need to discuss this because there is no change. Dynamically, you can apply classes, you can apply styles, same how you done in your function. Only the point is here you don't use any use state, you can directly use state. In state, you can mention class name, you can mention styles, you can apply those styles to any element. Style binding, class binding, no change. Everything is similar. Everything is similar. That means, for example, you want to bind any class or style here. That means this is actually, suppose we are applying some class name. So class name, suppose I will put here. So this is the class name, class name. You can dynamically bind anything. You can dynamically bind anything if you want, right? Just like how you done, but you have to get, you can get the value from this dot what state, and we can put some value, right? Some effect, something like this I am giving. That means there must be something like, what? Effect. Effect uses something like text success like this. That means it is applying dynamically the effect. You can see it will be class. That is same, no change, right? Only the point is you have to define in state and you need to access and apply. There is no change in that. Class binding, style binding, no changes. So they will work in the similar way. No need to discuss that here. The same concept. But event binding have some changes. Event binding have some changes. Event binding in class component have some changes. Now, generally, what you done when you have to write event, how do we define event? Suppose I will just put one button temporarily. So I'm just writing, I want to write some event. Which category they selected, I want to pop up the category name. That means now what we have to do. So first we need to write in the class. Can we write a function? No. Class cannot have a function. Then how do we write events? Events are written like methods. Method is nothing but handle, category, change. This is just a method. Class methods. And what this method have to do? It should get E, and I will use alert. What is alert? So this, E dot target dot what value. I'm just using this. And this method should be accessed when it changes here. That means we have to use what? On change. On change, it is a class method. This dot handle category change. That is how we need to bind methods. That means now here, so here I am selecting and it is working. It shows electronics, it shows footwear, it is displaying. That is how the events will work. That means all events are same, right? Event handlers are same, event arguments are same, args are same. Same means like functions. Functions, only the point is, so here only the point here is, so class event uses a class method, not function, right? It uses a class method. So that means what we have to do syntactically, you have to define some handle click, and you need to define some function. So on button, on click is equal to this dot handle click. That's how we need to define. But here a lot of issues are there. Currently, the handle click is not using any state. If you are trying to use state, then again issues will come. When you are trying to use state, some lot of issues will come. Those are all very important, especially while working with class. Right now, we will see what are the new things in event binding of class. Then you can see set state and all. That we'll see tomorrow. Right, in tomorrow's session, we will discuss all the changes that happens through class component. That means same example you can try, but here lot of new things you will learn. So because you will face some new issues related to classes. So while working with states, and we don't have use effect like things, then how to handle on load? For that, we need to learn about component life cycle. That is very, very important for React people, that we will see in tomorrow's session. Okay, tomorrow we'll discuss about that.